Good evening. This is quite a crowd. I like to say when I come to these events that I know where I don't belong. But in all seriousness, I'm Andrew Rayfeld, President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. I've been asked by the organizers of the event to stand in for the board chair, Patty Krogan, and the leadership of this organization because of the events that are unfolding. Tonight's program celebrates women in the clergy, a reflection of the integration of Western values of democracy, freedom, and equality with Jewish tradition, culture, and continuity. Before we begin tonight's program, we pause to recognize the assault on these values and our community that was represented by the attacks in Paris just a few days ago. We're here in solidarity with the victims of an attack that brought to that great city a silent standstill for 36 hours. We pause to recognize that the attacks were not merely an assault on the universal ideals of freedom, but a very targeted attack on the Jewish community itself. We pause to realize that the rejection of universal values goes hand in hand with the embrace of anti-Semitism. It's a lesson our people has sadly understood since the dawn of the Enlightenment in Europe over 200 years ago. It's rightly been noted that no one should have to live in fear for expressing what they believe, and even more so, no one should live in fear simply because of who they are, simply because of who we are. The Jewish Federation of St. Louis and the Jewish Community Relations Council have issued a statement of solidarity with the victims of last week's attacks, and we invite you to add your condolences at our website, jfedstl.org. They will be delivered to the leadership of the community there and join a worldwide show of support for what happened in France. With an estimated 550,000 Jews, France has the world's third largest Jewish community. We were heartened by the outpouring of millions of Parisians and leaders from around the world who joined there in a show of solidarity for all the victims of terror last week. And we ask all of you now to stand as we observe a moment of silence for those who were slaughtered. May their memory be truly for a blessing. Thank you. And now, let me turn the stage over to the real stars and let the celebration of our community begin.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Sharon Greenstein, and I am with Home Care Assistance, and this is Elaine Schneider, and she is with Vitas Healthcare. We are pleased to welcome all of you to this very special program this evening. Our two companies provide the ability for people to remain at home where they most want to be when they've been threatened with an illness. Among many of our services, we also provide, Home Care Assistance provides kosher care, and Vitas Healthcare is an accredited Jewish hospice provider. We are proud to sponsor this landmark celebration of women clergy and happy to join all of you in hearing these important conversations from these remarkable leaders in our community. It is now our pleasure to introduce the chair of this evening's event, Barbara Langsam-Schumann.
Thank you, Sharon, representing Home Care Assistance, and Elaine of Vitas Healthcare for sponsoring tonight's monumental program. I'd also like to mention that we were able to offer this event free of charge thanks to the Sherry Schechter Memorial Fund, Women's Philanthropy, and the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. I am honored to chair this inspirational and memorable program, and I'm gratified to see so many of you here tonight to support the women clergy of our Jewish community. You may or may not realize that St. Louis has several female Jewish clergy leading our congregations. The overall number of local women clergy says a great deal about the St. Louis Jewish community and exemplifies how our community truly embraces women as leaders. To our knowledge, this is also the first time in recent history that these extraordinary women have been brought together in this capacity. With Jewish Federation's new community development model and acknowledging the importance of bringing community together, Women's Philanthropy thought this was a wonderful opportunity to celebrate our commonality. Whether you identify as Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, or Orthodox, we are all women, honoring women. Of course, there are a few men here tonight honoring women, and we welcome them. My thanks go to Andrew Rayfeld, CEO of Jewish Federation of St. Louis, and Patty Krogan, Jewish Federation's board chair, for their incredible leadership and vision for our community. I'd also like to recognize and thank Julie Gibbs, Director of Women's Philanthropy, and Laura Fields, Development Associate of Women's Philanthropy, for their tireless dedication to making this landmark program a success. Would all of you please stand? Andrew, Patty, Laura, and Julie. Okay, last but not least, I thank the Jewish Federation's marketing team, the co-chairs of Women's Philanthropy, Vicki Singer and Sherry Schumann, and the entire Clergy Event Committee for all of their hard work in planning tonight's program. Please stand so we can recognize every one of you. Also, if there are any other clergy in the audience, women or men, active or retired, would you please stand so we can acknowledge you as well as our special guest tonight? All right. This evening, we've highlighted all of our community's Jewish women clergy in the program that's on your seat or in your laps right now, so you can read their bios and see their faces. Due to time constraints, we decided to have 7 women clergy on the panel, and they represent a cross-section of the congregations in our community. Additionally, we're thrilled to have 2 of the other clergy join us this evening. Roxanne Shapiro, Rabbi and Director of Lifelong Learning at United Hebrew Congregation, and Dina Sussman, Rabbi Educator at Central Reform Congregation. We're honored to have them join us and lead us in the Shechachianu as we celebrate the first time these women have come together for this kind of program.
Please join with us. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehachianu v'kiyamanu v'higyanu la'azman hazeh. We praise you, eternal God, sovereign of the universe, for giving us life, for sustaining us, and for enabling us to reach this season.
Thank you, Rabbis Dina and Roxanne. Now, I am really pleased to introduce Ellen Sherberg, our moderator for the evening. Ellen has been publisher of the St. Louis Business Journal since 1990. She joined the local business newspaper in 1980 and held several positions before being appointed publisher. Ellen is also a group publisher for American City Business Journals, with responsibility for the business journals in Birmingham, Memphis, Orlando, and Dallas. Ellen serves on the executive board of the United Way, as well as on the board of directors of the Regional Business Council, St. Louis Regional Chamber, and many others. She's the founder of the Women's Leadership Initiative for United Way. Ellen is a native St. Louisan, and for those who are wondering, it's Ladue Horton Watkins High School. And she is a graduate of Vassar College and earned a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism in New York City. Ellen grew up in a conservative kosher home here in St. Louis. Her bat mitzvah was at BSKI, and so was her daughter's. Ellen's married to Dr. Jerry Rosenblum, a pediatric gastroenterologist at Cardinal Glennon. Their daughter, Amy, and her family live in Boulder, Colorado. Amy, Ellen's Amy, would like to note that she graduated from Clayton High School with Rabbi Amy Fader. And on a personal note, I would like to note, as Ellen knows, I went all through school, first grade through high school, with Ellen's brother, Larry Sherberg. And I've known Ellen most of my life and admired her so much for all that time. Please join us in welcoming a homegrown treasure, Ellen Sherberg.
I want to say to all of you and to all of you that when I was growing up, it never would have seemed possible to be here tonight. I had, don't you think? I had many strong Jewish women in my life, always. And I had strong Rebbitzins and very strong daughters of rabbis as my friends. But to be on a panel with 7 women rabbis, much less in St. Louis, was just far beyond anything I would ever have believed possible. To be on that panel with 7 women rabbis at Federation was even more unimaginable. Truth be told, right? So Andrew, thank you, and thank you all. I asked why they asked me to moderate this panel, and the answer was very clear. We have 7 women rabbis, they said, each of whom is used to being in front of her own congregation. We didn't know who would be so bold as to tell them to stop talking. We thought, Ellen, perhaps it would be you. So please don't make me look bad. We've asked each rabbi to speak for 4 minutes and introduce herself and her particular beliefs to you. We've got this so under control. Where are the timekeepers? Timekeepers? Where are my timekeepers? Timekeepers. Raise your hand high. We have timekeepers.
They told me 4 to 6. I took 6. I have 6.
You see?
Then they can have the rest of the time.
And that is why, indeed, we're starting with Rabbi Talvi, as you can tell.
It's okay?
It is indeed.
Okay. Well, should we
My
just
honor. No, I'm going to introduce you. Wait, you can't start yet. You can't.
Let me
You
take
can't.
those 2 minutes.
You're going to take them anyway. I know you.
Sorry.
The reason we went out of order, alphabetically, is that Susan Talvi is indeed the Dean of St. Louis Women Rabbis.
The oldest.
Had she not embraced our community, and our community embraced her back, I'm not sure there would be 7 women rabbis on this stage today. So please join me in welcoming my good friend.
Should I sit? Should I sit?
You have to sit.
I have to sit. Okay.
sit.
All right. I'm sitting. So in 1972, the year that Sally Priesand was about to be ordained, Betty Friedan looked straight at me and she said, "And I suppose you're going to be a rabbi." I said, "Not me. A token in a patriarchal profession? Never." And God laughed. Or maybe it was Sarah who laughed again. I come from a long line of Sarahs. I was my grandmother Sarika's favorite. Once she was dying in a New York hospital when I was in rabbinical school at HUC. And the nurses called, and I rushed across town to be there because I wanted to say the prayers. I wanted to hold my grandmother as she went from this world to the next. But when I got there, she was sitting up in bed with bright eyes and red ribbons flowing from her hair. "Suzika," she said, "get me a rabbi." I had a miracle. I am a rabbi, Nona. And she laughed. The miracle was that my grandfather had come to her from the next world and told her that he wasn't ready for her yet and to get better. She did, and 10 years later, she lived to hold our daughter, Sarika, her namesake, in her arms. And like Sarah did so long ago, my Nona, Sarika, laughed and said, like the first Sarah, "I have a child at 90. When my grandmother died, the family wanted a real rabbi. But even the Orthodox Sephardic real rabbi who did her funeral could feel our bond. And after my eulogy, when it was time for Kaddish, he nodded to me, and I led her people in the ancient prayer of our people, the ancient prayer of holy chutzpah that says that in the face of death, we choose life. And I felt the paradigm shift that day, and I felt God's sweet smile. When I finally found my way to rabbinical school, it was to deepen my own spiritual program so that I would have the tools to change the world. My rabbi growing up in New York was a man named Michael Robinson. He was one of the rabbis who was challenged by Dr. King in the early 60s to show up. He was arrested in St. Augustine, Florida for integrating a lunch counter, and he marched in Selma for economic and racial justice. His life was dedicated to changing the world by speaking up and showing up and changing the paradigm using everything that he had, his privilege, his Torah, and the Jewish story that he carried in his bones. And I knew that I wanted to do that too, though I never imagined that it would be as a rabbi, not me, and God laughed. It's been almost 40 years since I began this journey, and I wouldn't change a moment of it. I met my beshert the first day of rabbinical school in Jerusalem, and together we have 3 adult children and a daughter-in-law who take our breath away every day. And they know, our children know, that they come first in our lives. I'm part of a congregation that created a workplace that shares a feminist, egalitarian vision that supports me as a working mother and that values complete inclusivity, radical hospitality, and the possibility of the awakening of compassion in everything, in absolutely everything that we do. And as a woman and as a rabbi, I've had the opportunity to build relationships with so many of you over these past 34 years here in St. Louis. And together we have bent the arc towards justice for women, for the gay, lesbian, and transgendered community, and for our Black and brown sisters and brothers, Jewish and non-Jews alike. We have shared the joy of Shabbat with music and dance and learning to renew our souls and keep hope alive as we dive into the Torah text each week after week, balancing the mystery with the meaning. And together, we bring the voices of my silent sisters in the texts and in the white fire to life for the very first time. As a liberal Jew, I'll admit that I often take the wiggle room that's built into the tradition, if it serves, if it will bring healing and restore hope. I'll never forget when I used to bring groups of women to the mikveh for different life cycle events, and we would immerse together, all of us. I remember Mrs. Pearl, of blessed memory, called Rabbi Rifkin, also of blessed memory, one day to ask what to do with me. And God bless Rabbi Rifkin of blessed memory, he says, "Rabbi Talvi brings women to the mikveh. Don't tell me the details." true story. And then when my mother died, and my 3 sisters and I kind of broke the rules and did her tahara ourselves, it was what she wanted. And as a rabbi, my sisters trusted me, and it helped us so much. And for all the holy opportunities I have had out there on the street as a rabbi, I am so grateful to be part of this moment in history, and I'm grateful that I have a part in it. Dr. King said, "I am a man," and today we say, "I am Mike Brown," and "Je suis Charlie." This is pure Torah. Love the stranger so that there will be no more stranger. Until we are all free, no one is free. Torah demands that we change the paradigm, you see, to change the world. And I have learned that the most important moments I have had as a rabbi are the stories that no one will ever know. They are the times that you've invited me into your homes and your hearts at the most private of times. The richest part of this work, and I had no idea that it would be this. Because in rabbinical school, I was told that I would never have friends in the congregation and that I should stay detached. But as a woman, though I'm not sure it's just as a woman, I could not survive that way. My heart breaks with every family, and I do know what is about me and what is not. But when you invite me in, I feel your pain and your joy, and I fall in love with every family that lets me be a part of your lives, and together we use this brilliant tradition to guide us through the most tender of times. And so I sit here today with all of these wonderful women serving this community, with Andrea, whose bat mitzvah I was at so many years ago, with this beautiful, beautiful Amy sitting next to me, who I remember singing as a teenager, and I'm the one that said to you, be a rabbi. It's a right? It's a cantor who's, it's a rabbi is a cantor who is a what is it? A cantor, be a rabbi, right? Because you can sing. Anyway, you remember what I said, right? Right? Yeah. Anyway. And of course, here we sit today with our own, we have a Maharat. I'm so proud. And I remember Brigitte's children were in my daycare center, right, at HUC. How proud are we in St. Louis to have a Maharat, our own Rory? It's very cool. Each one of these women is a gift. And I also have to mention Ardina, who is my daughter's age. And like my daughters, I know will do so much better than me, because these women are no longer tokens, you see, in a patriarchal profession. They have changed the paradigm, and they are changing the world. And they will continue to awaken compassion, and with that holy chutzpah of Jewish women who did their part in the midbar, they too will bring us closer to the promised land. I have to tell you, I get up every day, and I thank God that I became a rabbi, and that I am a woman. And together with God and Sarah and my grandmothers and my mother and all the women and men upon whose shoulders I stand, we smile and we laugh, because we know from this week's Torah portion what God tells us her name, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be what I will be. We know that there is hope in this moment, that we will go from je suis, I am, to what we can become. Because we are becoming. We are not done. The paradigm is shifting, the world is changing, and we women, we are still becoming. Thank you.
Okay, I forgot the directions. So,
It's a good thing.
let me just tell you, right, conveniently. After we hear from the next 6 panelists, each woman will speak about her journey, as Susan has. And then, after all of our panelists have spoken, there will be time for question and answer. In the back of your program, a page has been inserted that features each clergy along with a tear-off bottom section, and that allows space to write a question. If you like, you can direct it to a specific clergy member, or you can direct it to the entire panel. During the program, we hope that you'll feel free to write down any questions as they come up, and also to whom it's directed. When each person has finished her talk, we're going to ask that you turn in your questions to the runners, walkers, who are going to pick up the questions at the end of the aisle, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So I apologize for that. Now, indeed, it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Amy Fader. Amy's the senior rabbi of Temple Israel. She has held that post since 2009. At that time, she became the youngest woman in history to become a senior rabbi of a large Reform congregation. Amy.
So I'll tell you the story.
Oh, good.
So I came home from college one weekend, and I called Rabbi Talvi, and I said, Rabbi Talvi, I have a really big thing to tell you. I've decided that I want to become a cantor. And she looked at me kind of funny, and she said, you could be a cantor, but have you ever thought about becoming a female rabbi, a singing rabbi? And I never really had before, so thank you for that. But I have to say, too, also thank you to Rabbi Talvi and all of the female rabbis who came before. The year that I was ordained was the same year that Sally Presand, who's the first female rabbi, retired. So my classmates and I really looked at ourselves as the second generation of female rabbis. And the truth is that it was not so hard for us because of all of the women who came before. Because of all of them, our path was relatively easy. I will say that, sorry, this is making a little bit of noise. When I had the opportunity, which I am so proud of still, of becoming the first young female rabbi to lead a large congregation, what I said to people at the time and what I still say today is that honestly I would not have done it if it was not at Temple Israel. Because Temple Israel, besides being the congregation in which I grew up, has also been so incredibly supportive to me every step of the way. And they were really the ones who made it possible for me to be a young married mother and female rabbi all at the same time. They were the ones who said, well, why shouldn't someone who's 31 and a woman be able to be the head of this congregation? And they said, why shouldn't she be able to lead this congregation alongside her husband, who's a rabbi, who, by the way, I also met first day in Israel. And they also said, why shouldn't they be able to raise young children in this congregation? And those of you who have taken classes or been to services at TI know that I have led many a service and taught many a class with a baby strapped to my back and a guitar strapped to my front, and never had anyone said anything except, it's kind of awesome that you're able to do this. The one thing that I was always worried about in becoming a rabbi was that I wouldn't be able to live up to all of these dreams that I had had as a woman too, because I went to HUC straight after college, and I worry that all of the things that I wanted in my life, finding a partner and being able to raise children and have Shabbat dinners at home, I worried that if I became a rabbi, I wouldn't be able to do those things. And in the end, it turns out that I can. I can't do the Shabbat dinner part because it turns out I'm a terrible cook, which I didn't realize. But I've been able to find that partner and to, even though I work at it, to be, I think, a good wife and to be a good mom and to be there for my parents and my sister and my grandparents who are in the congregation. And so I'm very proud to be able to say that being a woman, I think, has enhanced my rabbinate, but never once has it stood in my way. And I look at this job as being the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And I think every single day, really every single day, there is a moment in my day where I think, in being able to do this job, I have actually made someone's life a little bit better today. I've been able to give them some sort of meaning that maybe they would not have had if they hadn't been in my office or been in a space where I was, and that is just the most incredible gift and allows me to do this work, which is very hard. It is very hard, but it is so incredibly rewarding, and it's such a gift that the women who came before me have been able to give to me, and it's one for which I will be eternally grateful.
Please welcome Rabbi Andrea Goldstein. She has served as rabbi of Congregation Sher Emeth since 1998. She has made the call for justice and equality, along with the search for spiritual connection, focal points of her rabbinate. Rabbi Goldstein.
So I was thinking about sort of what to share with everyone tonight in terms of sort of what brought me to this place. And in some ways, my story is not incredibly extraordinary. I grew up in a home where Judaism was really just sort of a part and parcel of who we were. I grew up in Cincinnati at the very beginning of my childhood with my parents and my maternal grandparents, where we celebrated Shabbat dinner with them in my memory, almost every Friday night. And I also had this very powerful connection to my grandmother, and I have many memories of standing in a line with my grandmother, it went more like this, because my grandmother was little, and then my mother, and then me, before the candle, sort of bringing the light of Shabbat into our hearts and into our homes. I had a pretty potent imagination as a child, and it was very, very, very easy for me to trust with all my heart that God was a part of my life and was close to me and was protecting me, was a spirit and a presence upon which I could rely. And I also have these very powerful memories of when I was very small, going to Adath Israel congregation in Cincinnati with my grandparents, especially my grandfather. And I have to be honest, I don't really remember anything that the rabbi ever said, But I remember seats that were really soft, and I remember feeling loved, and I remember, butter cookies afterwards, and, that were sweet. And I remember being, I would say in the middle, because, the services are long. We know, you get a little ootsy. And when you're little, and I remember, asking if I could, go to the bathroom, mostly because I really liked that click-clacky sound that the patent leathers made, on the tile. But, as I was thinking back, I was also remembering that, I was pretty little, and I always went by myself. And that was because the synagogue was a really safe place to be. I grew up with the synagogue in my heart as this place of goodness. And I really believed all the time, for a long, long, long time, really long time, that the synagogue was the place where people always were their best selves. And we moved when I was 7 years old here to St. Louis, and I became a part of Sher Emeth, and Rabbi Talvi was one of the rabbis who was working at Sher Emeth at the time. And though intellectually Sally Priesand became a rabbi when I was 2, it was Rabbi Talvi who taught me that this idea was reality, that it was not just an idea, that I wanted to be just as beautiful and just as wise and just as loving a presence and space. And I sort of continued along this path. I've been told that at my bat mitzvah, Rabbi Stiffman said I should become a rabbi, although I've been told that story. I don't know that it sunk in quite then. I didn't hear God call to me to take this path In fact, my mother, who's here, will tell you that I was studying at Northwestern, and all my friends had these grand plans of what they were doing after graduation, and I didn't quite know. And we went to Arby's, I think, and like my mom helped me make this list. And I did decide to apply to rabbinic school, but for it's 5 years of schooling, and for 3.5 years, I would tell people I'm just trying it out. I wasn't totally committed for quite a while. I loved the study. I loved being with the texts and sort of losing myself there and immersing myself. But it was a little bit later that I discovered that it turns out it was a little bit better when I added the people to the text and the people. And I would also say that there has been so much on this journey that has been unexpected, and things that could not be taught until they were a part of my life. But the best, I would agree with Rabbi Talvi that the privilege that I feel and the blessing that I feel and the gratitude that I feel that people welcome us into their lives at these most amazing and profound moments is constantly startling. In such a beautiful, beautiful way. And I didn't know until I started doing this work that to become a rabbi in a congregation and to have children and a family, that the congregation takes those children and makes them their own. And I feel so grateful that my children understand what it means to feel a sense of connection to community. I'm very honored and grateful to be here tonight, and I'm grateful every day for the work that I'm able to do. And that's it.
I am so very pleased to introduce Rabbi Elizabeth Hirsch. Rabbi Hirsch is currently senior rabbi at Temple Emmanuel. Some of you may have met her before she moved to Australia, and then she was at United Hebrew. I understand the growth at Temple Emmanuel since you've joined the congregation is phenomenal. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to Temple Emmanuel, because without you, I wouldn't be here this evening. I feel very humbled and a little bit emotional whenever I have the opportunity to speak about my passion, which is my rabbinate, which is my life. And I think I don't have a great grandiose story of how I journeyed here. I'll try and make it nice for you. But I think it boils down to that I wanted a lifestyle. I didn't want a profession that was a job. I wanted to live the values that I believed in. And daily living as a rabbi was doing just that. While I thank all of my colleagues, I also want to take a moment to think about my parents' memory, who would be quelling every time I have one of these moments, every time I lead a class or conduct services. So I really want to dedicate my 4 to 6 minutes to my dear parents' memory, and also in honor of my husband and son, without whose support, and many of you know Robbie and Noah, and without their support, I couldn't be half the rabbi that I am. I grew up in what I'm going to term a mixed marriage. My mother was classical reform. She'd be very proud of me at Temple Emmanuel. And my father grew up conservative. But let me explain to you what that meant in the Hirsch household. It meant that my dad would only use the old Silverman prayer book and wanted a conservative service. And my mother, who grew up classical reform, was complete with ritual. But ritual had a lot of superstition. So we lit Shabbat candles, but you couldn't light them barefoot, because only barefoot you was a house of mourning. My mother would come in from a Shiva call or from the funeral going, don't talk to me, and head right for the bathroom to wash her hands. I keep wet ones in my car. We had kosher meat, but only on the holidays. So that explains a lot of me, doesn't it? So my mother used to talk about, because my mother was used to the old Reform prayer book, the old Union prayer book, and she said for years she sat at High Holidays crying until someone showed her that the conservative book went the other way. So I grew up conservative, but we always had egalitarian seating. My rabbi of blessed memory was Samuel Porath. He was a Sabra, he was Israeli. We had women presidents, but I went to religious school 3 days a week, and that's the reason I can't ice skate, because we had free lessons. Ice skating became Monday and Wednesday, and those were 2 of the days that I had to go to religious school. But I've always loved Judaism. And like many of you have stated, it was a safe place. The synagogue was a safe place, and it was a place where I would go every Friday night, even as a teenager, and I loved just sitting in the pew with my mom or my mom and my dad, and then I might go out afterwards, but it was my way of ending the week. It was my way of becoming whole with myself. I was introduced to Nifty when I was about 15 years old, which was a godsend because I was one of a handful of Jews at a school in the suburb of Buffalo, New York, so I grew up as a minority with a great deal of anti-Semitism. When I was in college, I went to Skidmore. My junior year, I met Rabbi Linda Motzkin, and it was an actualization. It was an actualization like many of my colleagues have had of seeing a woman rabbi of what was possible. And then the more I looked into the rabbinate, I also applied to the Reconstructionist School, but decided to go to HUC instead, that the rabbinate, and many of you will appreciate this term, for me was not a treadmill, although I do love the treadmill, that the rabbinate was a way of integrating learning and studying and growing and working with people, of engaging moments of people's lives with God. I could be pastoral, I would enjoy writing. And it wasn't until several years ago, after I left United Hebrew and I left the full-time rabbinate, that I did a number of other rabbinical works. And my love goes out to Lori Goldberg, who's here this evening, who embraced me with open arms at Jewish Family and Children's Service, where I learned another aspect of the rabbinate, and probably some of the hardest and best work I've ever done was in nursing homes and skilled and assisted. So the rabbinate to me, as a 19 or 20-year-old, was an opportunity to, every day would be new, every hour would be different. So honestly, when I applied to rabbinical school, I was 20 years old. What did I know? I knew absolutely nothing. It was either that or law school. So with all due respect to the lawyers, I think I would have made a better rabbi than lawyer. So, while I was the first woman rabbi at United Hebrew and Temple Emmanuel, I think I've made my career. It's ordained almost 22 years ago. I've tried to make my career not about my gender. I've always believed the qualities were about the individual and not about the gender. So when people would say, oh, women rabbis are this or women rabbis are that, I always pushed back. So the decision to enter rabbinical school was actually very simple, but continuing to become is the wonderful challenge, because each day, each interaction with individuals reinforces my decision. It's that we are all on a journey. We are all somewhere in a fabulous wilderness of becoming. So I am quite blessed to be part of a profession that encourages growth and community. It encourages study. It encourages love. It encourages each of us to be a living Torah. And I'll just close with something that stayed with me. During our first year of rabbinical school in Jerusalem, we'd have visiting rabbis. And a rabbi said to me, and it's one of the few things I remember, was too many rabbis love Judaism, but they don't like Jews. And I have to tell you, that stayed with me. And every day, every moment, I remind myself of that, and I do a self-check that I love our people. I love the people that are part of our congregation, whether they are Jewish, whether they affiliate with the Jewish people, but that's what I love, that yes, I was drawn to this lifestyle because I love Judaism, but I also love Jews and the Jewish community.
Next, I'd like to introduce Cantor Sharon Nathanson. She was born into a very musical family here in St. Louis and has served as the full-time cantor at Congregation B'nai Emunah since 2003. Cantor Nathanson.
So I went to Ladue High School.
Very good.
And I actually grew up at B'nai Emunah, and I remember as a child, I just had this overwhelming pride. I go to B'nai Amunah. I don't know really where it came from, but I was so proud. I was so proud that I went to Hebrew school 3 days a week and Sunday school sometimes. But so I wanted to share, of course, my journey starting from all the way back when I was a little girl, and I felt very much the same way as Andrea did when she was a little girl, that the synagogue was a safe place, and she remembers butter cookies, and I remember developing my taste for herring. You know, and that's all there is. So I still have to have herring every Shabbat, or it's like, it doesn't feel like Shabbos. When I first began as a cantor at B'nai Amunah almost 12 years ago, there was a woman in her 90s, a lovely woman who I had great affection for. And each Shabbat at the Kiddush, she would come find me and grasp my hand strongly, and with great passion say to me, "I never thought I'd like a woman cantor, but I just love you." I took that as a great compliment, and I always admired her ability to overcome a preconceived notion of what she thought she would like. And at an advanced age, it's really not easy for people. In some ways, hearing a woman speak and hearing a woman teach is a little bit easier than hearing a woman sing all through the service. There's an aesthetic quality that's different for people. But I found that when I began at B'nai Amunah, some of my biggest fans were surprisingly the oldest men in the shul and the most traditional men in the shul. So how did I get to this place where I am now? The first female cantor in our congregation's nearly 130 years. I didn't go to Jewish camp. I was not active in USY. I was a Sunday school dropout. It's not that I didn't like the kids or the teachers. I found, especially as I moved into 7th, 8th, 9th grade, that the discussions were interesting and relevant. But I was also in the synagogue choir, which rehearsed on Sunday mornings. And that's where I felt useful. That's where I felt I was contributing as well as learning. And that's where I felt most at home. In college, I went to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Music positions at the local Reform Temple just seemed to keep popping up. I was the youth choir director and then a Friday night soloist, and then also became the song leader for the Saturday morning service. And during that time, I was studying vocal performance, but it began to feel a bit two-dimensional. So I switched to music education. But when I did my student teaching, I felt so uncomfortable. I felt like I was trying to be someone else. And Hazan Lissik's voice kept coming back to me. "You should be a cantor. You should be a cantor." He had said this for years, but I didn't have female role models. I would look at him and think, I can't be Hazan Lissik. And I'm not. But sometimes I hear his voice in my head and I expect it to come out. It doesn't. But the fact was, I kept finding myself drawn to such a life. I felt myself drawn to the teaching, to the pastoral work, to the singing, and all in a Jewish framework. So my senior year of college, I sent away for the materials for the Jewish Theological Seminary and information about the cantorial school. I still have the 1997 course requirement information book sitting on my shelves. I graduated college with a bachelor's degree in music education, knowing that it wasn't quite right for me. I wrestled for quite some time over whether or not to go to cantorial school. For a variety of reasons, I ended up deciding not to go. It was no small decision and was at times painful, but I always remained active in synagogue life at B'nai Amunah, and singing for Friday night services and high holidays at Kol Am, high holy days at Hillel, filling in for cantors around town, and teaching B'nai Mitzvah students at B'nai Amunah while performing and teaching violin. When I was approached to take over the position of the cantor at B'nai Amunah, I knew it was a big undertaking. Long and unpredictable hours, years and years of study for cantorial exams while raising a family. But with the help of my very capable and patient husband, it works. I recently was going through a lot of old stuff that my mom had saved from my growing up. One of the things I found was a journal. I guess it was in some writing class in high school. We had to keep journals. And one of the things I wrote in there was that women will never be fully liberated until men feel fully liberated. So I was lucky that I found a man whose parents taught him how to cook and sew and how to be playful and nurturing and caring. And so with all of his help, I am able to do that. And I walked into my role on the very first day at B'nai Yamuna as the cantor, feeling quite at home. So different from the feeling I had when I was a general music teacher in a school. So my kids love this Winnie the Pooh's Heffalump movie. And there's a song with this great line in it, something like, I feel more myself when I'm with you. That's how I feel when I get to do the work that I do. So thank you for allowing me to do it.
It's truly my honor to introduce to you Maharat Rory Picker-Neese. She serves as the Director of Programming, Education, and Community Engagement at Base Abraham Congregation. She is one of only 5 women in this position in the entire world.
Thank you very much, and it's really such an honor to be with everybody here, and this is something that I never could have imagined while growing up, mostly because it didn't really exist until about 4 years ago. So I grew up in what would be classified as a very right-wing Orthodox home. I davened at an aguda, for those of you who know what that means. I have 3 brothers who all study in Kollel. So for a while, my husband would just joke that my parents had 4 kids who would just sit and learn all day. But the joke was on them because I'm the one who got a job out of it. So, when I was in college, there were a few friends who we decided to spend a Shabbat together. And we had done some weekend together through student government, and we thought it would be fun to spend another weekend together. And so I invited them over to my house in Brooklyn, New York. My father was away. He had decided to take my brother to Israel. It was Purim weekend, and Purim would be longer in Israel because, anyway. Not the point of the story. So I invited them over to my house, and we were going to spend Shabbat together. And all of them were much more what we would call modern Orthodox. And so Friday night, they said, we should go to shul. And I said, we don't do that around here. Women don't go to shul on Friday night. And they said, there's one right across the street. And I said, okay, but I'm telling you, this isn't really done. And so we went across the street. That was the synagogue where I had always been going. And we went, the women's section was upstairs, the men's section was downstairs. And it was sort of this U shape with this kind of big wall and a curtain on top, so you could sort of like peer down over the curtain if you wanted to see. And we went up to the men's section on Friday night, the women's section on Friday night, and we opened the door, and the women's section was filled with men. Because women don't go to shul on Friday night, and so the men would go up there. And some of them wanted to have a little bit more of a personal prayer. Some of them were reading a book. Some of them were napping. And so I was really uncomfortable, and my friend said, nope, we're going to sit down, and we're gonna pray. And so we sat down. We got all these dirty looks from these men because we had come into their section. And, and so my friends kind of like sidle up to them, and they're sort of shifting down a little bit. And we went and we prayed, and it was a terrible experience. And so I went to my dad after he came back, and I said to my dad, I said, you have to go to the rabbi and you have to tell him that he needs to make an announcement that if he doesn't want women to go into the men's section, men can't go into the women's section. And my dad said, well, why would women go into the men's section? And I said, you have to tell him he has to make this announcement that this should be the women's section. I had not, at that point, I had no qualms about having a separate space. I had no qualms about the fact that I couldn't see anything. That was not at all my complaint. I said, but you have to tell them that this is going to be our space. And so my dad spoke to a few people. He couldn't ask the rabbi to make such an announcement. He spoke to a few of the board members, and they came to a compromise. They said that the next time I would be home for the weekend, that I should let them know, and what they would do is they were going to lock the door of the women's section, and they were going to give me the key. And when I got to shul, I would find one of them, and I would take the key, and I could unlock the door and go in and lock the door behind me, and that way I could pray on Friday night. And I sort of thought, this doesn't quite sound like a good idea, but they're offering me a compromise. I guess I have to be fair. I don't know. And so I went and I did this. And so the next time I said, okay, I have to at least tell them I tried it. And so I went and I got the key from somebody. I unlocked the door. I went into this space. I locked the door behind me. And throughout the service, I would hear this sort of jostling of the door. And I had no idea who was trying. And I sort of joke, it's my very first protest that nobody knows I took. Because I assume everyone just thought that someone forgot to unlock the door. Nobody knew I was in there. And I had no idea if the people who were trying to get in were men or if they were women. And I realized that I was the person who had locked the door. And I went home and I thought, I don't ever want to be that person again. I don't ever want to be the person who's locking somebody else out of this space. And I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't really know what to do with that. But a few years later, when they announced that they were going to be starting an institution to train women for leadership positions in the Orthodox community, I should say that there had been women who were taking on inspirational leadership roles for years, and like others have mentioned, we all stand on the shoulders of all of these women. But there was a lack of recognition, there was a lack of formality. Nobody really knew how to become that person, and no one knew how to find that person when somebody became that person. And so I guess it was now about 5 or 6 years ago that Yeshivat Maharat was started. I promised some people I would explain what that is. And so they started it to basically say, we're going to formalize a curriculum so Orthodox women have a place that they know that they could go to get the training that's necessary to take on leadership roles within the Orthodox community. And we're going to tell the community that these women have been trained to do these roles. And so they started this program. They decided to give a different title. There's this general discomfort. I'll be very honest. If the group had jumped up and said, we're ordaining women to be rabbis, I wouldn't have signed up. It was not something I'd ever grown up with. I'd never grown up with female rabbis. It wasn't something that I was comfortable with. But when they said, we're going to give women this training, we're going to acknowledge that they have this capability, and we're going to give them a title that's unique to them, I said, okay, I'll try this out. And so we went through this training. It's really a parallel rabbinical training program with all of similar curriculum to other Orthodox seminary programs with a focus on Jewish law, pastoral counseling, texts, teachings. And throughout, I wasn't really sure quite where it was going to take me. I thought, this seems like a place I should be. And somewhere down the line, I realized this was my chance to open up the doors for other people. Because not just for women, although that's part of it, but really there's plenty of men who don't have the same access in the Jewish community either. To be able to stand up and lead services, somebody has to teach you how to do that. To be able to study something with the text. I had been in yeshiva education my whole life, and nobody had ever actually given me the text. I remember my halacha, my Jewish law class, was basically the teacher just wrote the laws on a piece of paper and then photocopied it and handed it out to us. And I thought, I want to know what the text says. I want to know what's in it, and I want to make sure that anyone who wants to can pick up this text and they can know what's in it also. And so I went through the program really with that focus. That's really, I think for me, access is just at the core of all that I do and all that I think so many of us do who know what it's like to not have been allowed access previously. And I'm also, like everyone here has mentioned, just so grateful to St. Louis for deciding that and Bay Save in particular, when they were looking for somebody and they said, we have a place for a woman. And they called Yeshivat Maharat and they said, okay, we're willing to talk about it. And it's hard for me in some ways because taking on that title and taking on that role, by definition, makes me scary to a lot of people. Makes a lot of people really uncomfortable. And that makes me uncomfortable because I like to think that I'm not really that scary. And at the same time, I know that had I not gone through that program, had I not taken on that title, that never would have given me the access to enable me to reach out to so many other people and give them the access to Judaism that they feel so passionate about. So I grapple with where that role sometimes takes me, but I'm so grateful to St. Louis as a community that has really embraced women in leadership roles, and really, I think, at least for me, not made it as scary as it seemed initially.
And while we're certainly grateful to everyone on the panel, I think we owe a special debt of gratitude to Rabbi Brigitte Rosenberg, because indeed, this was her idea. So, Rabbi Rosenberg has served United Hebrew Congregation since 2004. She became senior rabbi in 2011. Also, she is the immediate past president of the St. Louis Rabbinical Association. And so it's appropriate for you to wrap this up.
Although if my kids were here, they'd be saying, Mom, keep it short. Keep it short. Nobody wants to hear. So it's sort of scary now to be the last person, as we've heard from everybody. But I will clarify that this wasn't my idea. It was a conversation Julie and I had. And one of the things that I like to talk about with regard to St. Louis is really in this country, so many people are like, St. Louis, where's St. Louis? And they think of us as this flyover Midwestern place. And I was speaking with Julie Gibbs, and I said, this is really a pretty forward-thinking community, that there are this many women serving in synagogues, serving in our community, female clergy, and we really ought to be talking about that. That is not saying that we shouldn't be certainly celebrating and talking about the male clergy who are in our midst, but really just acknowledging that for so many people who like to think of the East Coast and the West Coast as so forward-thinking, we're right smack dab in the middle, and we're pretty forward-thinking in that. So probably unlike most of my colleagues here, being a rabbi to me never seemed out of reach or out of realm for me. At my bat mitzvah, there was a female rabbi and a female cantor standing on the bima, along with a male senior rabbi, both of whom I was very close to, and I will say that in speaking today about her, that I just want to honor, and probably many on the panel know, Rabbi Judith Abrams, who died a couple of months ago, and her memory is a blessing. And so once she then left our congregation, another female rabbi then came to serve in our congregation. So I grew up in a quite large Reform congregation in Houston, Texas, which some people also think is backwards, but pretty forward-thinking in that sense. So I never thought it out of the realm of possibility to be a female rabbi. Although I will say I entered high school with great dreams of being a heart surgeon. I'm not quite sure why, because after a semester of high school math and science, that wasn't for me. But I was quite blessed to spend many summers at our regional reform camp, Green Family Camp, and then became very active in NIFTY, just as Rabbi Hirsch found NIFTY. And NIFTY was a godsend for me. And certainly at camp and through NIFTY, there were so many in our region, rabbis, who were just so integrated into our program. At our regional events, our local events, the rabbis were there and they were present. They were active and they cared, or at least I as a teenager thought that they cared. And more importantly, as Rory talked about, they were accessible. And that's what I appreciated. They were accessible and they were approachable, and no topic with them was off limits. And that to me was fabulous. And so as I entered confirmation in the 10th grade, when we came to the end of it, I was 15 and I turned to my mom and I said, I'm going to be a rabbi. I'm going to be just like these other rabbis that I have known. Even thinking about my own senior rabbi, he was approachable and he was warm and he was welcoming. And so that's what I began to think about in terms of being a rabbi. But I also, being 15, thought that being a rabbi meant that I could be at summer camp all the time and that I could be in youth group all the time. Two things which I love. So when I was in college, that's all I thought about. I knew when I was graduating that I was going to go to rabbinical school, although I will say when it came down to senior year of college and that application was in, and all of my sorority sisters applied to multiple programs in law school or medical school or for a master's in English, I had one school that I applied to, and that was the Hebrew Union College. And I sat there just nervous, and I will tell you my interview weekend was terrible. The day the letter came, I actually was not at home, and my roommate called, who is now my husband, called my husband Lee, although he wasn't my husband at the time, and said, the letter came, should we open it? Should we see what it says? And they did. And then they held it over a lamp, and she burned part of the envelope. But they actually knew before I knew that I had gotten into school. And so I entered rabbinical school, certainly excited, but very much like Rabbi Goldstein. For about 4 years, I said, I don't know if this is for me. I just don't know if this is for me. And part of that came from my classmates. And I was the first class at HUC that was over 50% women. We may have been the last class that was over 50% women. But I had many women in my class who said, and they stood up and said they came to rabbinical school to make a point because they were women. And I'm thinking, that's not why I came to rabbinical school. I didn't even think about being a woman. I just wanted to be a rabbi. And so as we've even heard on the panel, when I think about being a rabbi, I don't often think about necessarily being a woman. It's who I am, both parts of it. And so really when I think about why I became a rabbi, in many ways we've heard that already, certainly to make a difference, but to make Judaism accessible, to make it approachable, to make it warm and welcoming. And one of the things I think that all of us on the panel have said and can agree about, that it really takes a spectacular partner to make it worth it, or not even worth it, to make it accessible or easy for us to do. And I am so thankful. My husband journeyed with me from high school through becoming a rabbi and now, and really it is something together that we do even when we open our home and even when we have people together. And there is that beauty in having children in the congregation. And when I think about sitting here with Susan, she made it possible. She talked about her nursery school or her daycare center, but at Hebrew Union College, at least in Cincinnati, we were so blessed to have a child care center on campus. And one rabbi who actually, some of her family is from St. Louis, Sissy Coran, said to me before I went to rabbinical school, if you can, you should have a child while you are in rabbinical school so you have that experience and understand the beginnings of parenting before you even step into the world of the congregation or the rabbinate. I was able to do that, as actually was most of my class. And Susan came and spoke at our ordination because for so many of us, that daycare center made it possible, men and women, for us to be students, but also to be parents. And I think that for us was a blessing that has continued into our rabbinates.
A great panel, don't you think? And a great audience, don't you think?
Yes.
You have been amazingly attentive. I wish you could see yourselves. You're leaning in, literally. You're light, you're interested, you're quiet. And now it's your turn. So we have runners walking up and down the aisle, and I hope that you will share with us some questions, preferably not comments, for the women who are here with us tonight. The organizers of this event have been incredible. And so I have some questions to start with. And if you don't mind, we'll jump in, okay? So most, if not all, congregational rabbis, to the points that you were making, are on call for life cycle events for members of their congregations. How do you do that? How do you make that work? And part of it's around your family, but also around yourselves and your own sanity. Can you tell us? Anyone goes.
Well, there's the blessing, certainly, of a partner who's flexible. As your kids get older, there's the blessing of your kids being flexible as well. But I would say, at least for me, when I think about my own personal time or what I need for myself with regard to being on call, I make sure I schedule that time for myself. Sometimes at hours other people might not do it, but to make sure that I give myself that time. So for example, I work out with a trainer 3 days a week, but I do it at 6:30 in the morning because no one's really gonna call. Sometimes they might, but nobody's gonna really call me at 6:30 in the morning. So you learn to work through those time periods and make that time for yourself.
I sometimes say that Temple Emmanuel is a little bit of a boutique congregation, that we are small by choice. I get texts sometimes at 10 o'clock at night. But I also feel as much as I give, the congregation is very giving back to my family. We just came back from being away for almost 2 weeks. I think I had one email. And the congregation is very much encouraging, you go away. And like you said, Rabbi Rosenberg, you know, like I'll run 20 miles when I'm in training for a marathon. Nancy, that'll be soon, before your marathon. And so if I run 22 miles, I check the phone after every 7 miles or so. But I believe that a healthy congregation wants their clergy to be healthy. So I feel like it's a partnership.
Anything else?
Well, I would say that, you know, it's a challenge to balance all of that. And I would say that I do have moments of heartbreak when I know that my children would rather have me with them. But I will say that also gets balanced when I overheard my daughter once telling a friend of hers, my mommy cannot come to this, but she's helping someone who needs help more than I do right now. So I think just sort of having a family who can be understanding and proud that they loan me out to be with other people is really gratifying in that way too. But it's hard sometimes. But it's not. it's worth it, I guess, is what I would say.
So Susan, I saw you raise your kids, and lots of people in this room have lots of different visions of you, but mine was watching you reach deep into the back of the minivan and pull out the Torah, because you were delivering it and carrying it. How'd you do it?
I had tricks, mostly. Of course, Jim and I really did it together, but I knew that there would be a lot of times that I wouldn't be able to be there because I really did want to be with my community. I wanted to serve. When people needed me, I wanted to be there. So I did things like in the middle of the day, because I was, out most nights, but in the middle of the day, I would make sure that I would drive carpool. So my kids always had the illusion that I was there. And when you drive carpool, they forget. I don't know, it's like they don't think you're listening or something, or and so I always kind of they always kind of knew that, there were certain times they could count on me being there. And the other thing is, we had, children that had some health problems, and the community was very supportive of that. And when my kids were sick and we needed to be there, they expected me to be with my kids. And so, I worked hard, and I did everything that I could because I knew that there would be times that I couldn't be there. And I think that for our children, they knew when they needed us, they could count on us. And so even though it wasn't all the time, and there were times that we missed, like Andrea said, when they needed us, they could count on us being there. And as you said, we schlepped them around a lot. They came with us a lot too. They really did. So, you juggle and you balance and you explain, like, you tell them why you're not there too. And these past weeks, these past months actually, my kids are, now I have to call in and tell them that I'm home from Ferguson and I'm safe, and they're not calling me now, I'm calling them and telling them, "Are you home, Mom?" "Yeah, I'm home, I'm fine," so all those years I did that with them, so,
My children are still very young. My son just turned 6. My daughter is 2. And so far we've been lucky. They don't have a lot of soccer games or things that they need for us to be at. But for me, it's really because I'm very lucky to have my extended family here. My sister and my mother and my grandmother who are here tonight. They have spent a lot of time helping raise my children. And it's because of them that I can do this job. And also the fact that since my husband is the other rabbi at the temple, when one of us says, "No, I do have to be at dinner tonight, I do have to be at soccer," then the other one takes on the rabbinic duty. And so far the congregation has been incredibly understanding that sometimes they get one of us and sometimes they get the other, and they're in good hands regardless, and so are our children.
Nathan, do you have something to add?
Well, I mentioned my husband being so supportive, and I guess I also have an extended family here, and I couldn't do this without my dad, who schleps my children around, and my mother-in-law, who schleps my children around, and, sisters-in-law and aunts, and it really does make an enormous difference. But it's not all roses all the time. When I come home, my son always asks me, "Are you staying? Are you staying?" Yeah? So I had a conversation with Rabbi Talvi, and she said, "My kids all turned out great." Which was
And they
great,
did.
because I often wonder what kind of therapy my children are going to be in a few years. But luckily we do have lots of support here, and the congregants are also very supportive.
Rory, you don't have an extended family here.
No, I don't, which is a challenge sometimes. But I'm also very blessed to have a very supportive partner, and one who is lucky enough to be in a very flexible job. So he works remotely for a Jewish new media organization based in California, which he did intentionally when he knew that I was going to go on the job market. And so I don't think that there's anyone prouder of what I'm doing than he is. Which has just been great for me. He really feels like that's part of his contribution, is being able to sometimes be the one who's putting the kids to sleep so I could be teaching a class or meeting with people. I have very young children, so also not really soccer games and things like that, but my 3.5-year-old daughter is so proud of the work that I do. And that's also such an inspiration. We're in a congregation that really embraces family, and so they get to come with me, and nobody gives us guilt if they make a little bit of noise during services or things like that, or sometimes they'll come up when I'm giving the sermon, and that's okay too. And there's such a look of pride on my daughter's face when she'll say, "You're going to go up and you're going to give the sermon because you're the Maharat." And that just makes it all worth it. And so I know that for as much as there's those times that I'm missing, and that's really hard for me, I also know that she's growing up knowing all the possibilities that she has in her life.
This is from the audience, and it is for each one of you. If you were the rabbi at the Paris synagogue, would you have closed?
You know, I thought a lot about that Friday night as we sat in our shul, and we had the luxury of being together and not being afraid. And I don't know what I would have done because I'm not there. And thank God I don't know what it feels like to be that afraid, to be openly Jewish, to be scared that someone would attack my synagogue. I can barely imagine that. I really can't. And I lived for 2 years in Tunisia between college and rabbinical school, and it wasn't always the friendliest of places in Tunis. It was when the PLO was moving in, and I do remember feeling, going to the synagogue and being very careful, but I don't think that I can even begin to imagine what the people in that synagogue had to what the decision that they had to make that night. And I so respect what they did because nobody was hurt that night. Right. Maybe they saved lives that night, and that 3 million people gathered in support, not only of the people of Paris, but of the Jewish community. Next day we should be saying, "Je suis juif," I wish the whole world was saying, "Je suis juif." But the fact that they were that scared, I imagine they did what they had to do.
When I was interviewed to become the senior rabbi of Temple Israel, one of the questions that they asked me was, if your congregation received a bomb threat on Rosh Hashanah, what would you do? And which was a terrible question, so for those of you who are on my committee. But what I said, at least what I remember saying, was that if, God forbid, that were to happen, that one of the things that I felt so lucky about being in this community is that even though, let's be honest, even though a lot of the times our congregations, we are competitors, that this would be one of those times where I know that I could go to my colleagues or I could come to the Federation and I could say, we need somewhere to pray. And that I know in a heartbeat that any one of my colleagues in any Jewish institution would say, if Temple Israel is in trouble, we will open our doors to you. And this is the same conversation that we had actually just, I guess, a month or two ago with Andrew Rayfeld when we were trying to decide what might happen, when we were wondering what kind of riots there might be after Ferguson. And we came together as a group of rabbis to say, what can we do for our colleagues in the congregations in this area that may be at risk, and how can we open our doors to them? And so, well, I'm not sure what I would have done if I was in France. What I can certainly say is that here I feel very confident that when we do have these moments, or if we ever have these moments, that we are scared that there are enough of us in this community that we could turn to each other and have the support that we would need to feel safe and to be able to worship and be together as Jews anytime we like.
Hello. No, I'll just echo, right. it's an impossible question to answer in the sense that we feel deeply connected to the Jews of France right now, and to any person of any faith who is feeling like it's not okay to be who they are simply because of the way they practice or the way they believe. I think that, obviously being able to be together as a community in the aftermath and the wake of such a tragedy would be of great comfort, but that doesn't trump the safety. And so if one life can be saved, it is if we are saving the entire world. And that mitzvah trumps all others, including being together in observance of Shabbat. And it doesn't alter the sense of identity that people have of who they are. And, I think it is right to think that we don't know, and how many lives, perhaps we don't know who could have been saved on their way to shul or on their way home in that particular instance.
Does anybody want to add? Okay, so on a different note, and I'm going to read this just the way it was written. What are some of the differences between a rabbi and a maharat? And for that matter, besides song leading, what is the difference between a cantor and a rabbi? Clearly, we know it was directed to the two of you. So will you take this?
I have to tell you, when people ask me the difference between a rabbi and a maharat, it's much better when Rabbi Talvi answers it than she can say things that I can't say. If you don't mind if I just jump in. In terms of, there's really no difference in the role that I have within the congregation as a maharat to the rabbi, and I do work side by side with a rabbi, with Rabbi Chaim Schaffner. The only differences between the roles that we take on really have to do with the same differences that exist in an Orthodox congregation between any man and any woman within the congregation. So to the extent that we sit on separate sides of the mechitza, because we do have men and women sitting separately within the congregation. I don't lead prayers. The rabbi doesn't always lead the prayers either, but we don't have women who are leading prayers for the entire congregation. And I don't count towards the prayer quorum, towards the minyan, because we count 10 adult male Jews for the minyan. But none of those are inherent to, all of those are things that I would be true anyway as a lay leader. And so to the extent of within that, what I'm able to do as the maharat in the congregation, really we split most of the other responsibilities other than where our strengths are, or when sometimes there's a person who feels more of a connection to one of us than the other. So we switch off every week of who gives the sermon. We both teach classes. We both offer pastoral counseling. We both do fundraising. We both sometimes writing grant proposals and making sure that light bulbs get changed, and all the other things that take place. So, and that's something that I'm also really grateful for. That he really sees the role as a role of colleagues. That he has really allowed me to take on all of those possibilities, and the congregation also really has. So, the role of a maharat in training is really parallel to the role of a rabbi. As was said in the introduction, there's only 5 of us, so we're all kind of making it up as we go along in our individual congregations. And I'm really blessed to be in a place where my role is really one that's side by side with the rabbi.
Okay. Well, I guess it's the difference between a rabbi and a cantor was the question. And well, the rabbi is immersed in text and Jewish law, and while there's a lot of crossover, my area is really the sacred sounds and the intricacies of the musical aspects of our liturgy. So the rabbi kind of reaches people through the heart, but also through the intellect. And I reach people through the heart, but also through the guts. Because there is an immediate reaction, right, when you have something musical. And I like to create that opportunity for a pathway into Judaism, not necessarily through the study of the text, but through the study of learning the skills for the home ritual and for the skills to participate in the ritual life of the synagogue. And my role is not to be the best, at least in my opinion, is not to be the best musician in the shul. It's not even to be the best singer in the shul, but it's to create opportunities for people through music, to be a part of the community.
Rabbi Talvi, do you want to say something about the difference between the Maharat and the rabbi?
I think they did a great job.
Okay, 'cause if you could add, that would be good.
But the Maharat, in my heart, she's a rabbi. and she could be my rabbi. And for, I mean, if you've ever heard Sharon sing, and you've heard her at a funeral, I mean, she knows, she prays in a way that draws us all in. She uses her voice and her heart and her soul in ways that, help us all heal and feel. So, thank you.
Rabbi Rosenberg, we're going to start on your end. Would you describe yourself as a feminist?
Oh, gosh. Oy. So I will tell you that I started off college as a women's studies major. And I would have said once upon a time, fervently yes. And then, although I wouldn't say that I'm not a feminist, but I also was, and I knew when I was in that first year of college that I also had these dreams of being the woman who was going to have it all, the career, the soccer mom, the Volvo, the kids in the back seat, everything. And I had a young woman say to me, you can't be a feminist and have that. But she also told me, and I remember it so well, she said to me, you can't be a feminist until you know how to love a woman. And I looked at her and I said, oh, okay. And I didn't think the two had anything to do with each other, but I also, at the time, was in all these classes, and I will say, though I graduated from Boston University, I went to Wheaton College in Massachusetts, not the one in Illinois, and it had just gone co-ed. And so I had wanted to go to an all-women's school, and my mother said no. She was a graduate of Smith and wouldn't let me go to a women's school. But we were at a time where there was a lot of tension on campus, and there were a lot of angry women, and it didn't work for me. And so actually I ran far away from women's studies after that. So would I call myself a feminist? Yes. But not to the extent that it's over and above anything else. I don't know if a term equalist would be better. I feel very strongly about strong, powerful women, but at the same way I feel about strong, powerful men who also appreciate strong, powerful women, and that there doesn't need to be an either-or. So that is probably the best way that I could describe how I'm a feminist, although in rabbinical school, somebody at some point I think said, you're like a lipstick feminist, you're very girly, but also strong. These terms keep coming, they're bizarre terms that we have. Rory.
A few years ago, I was speaking on a panel for an organization called the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. And somebody asked the panel this very same question. And it was all young women leaders, and everyone basically said in some form or another, we're feminists, but the term has become really loaded, and to use the term sometimes stops a conversation, so it's easier to avoid the term. And there was a woman in the audience who jumped out of her seat and yelled that we had set back the women's rights movement 40 years, which was probably one of the biggest contributions to the Jewish community that I had made. It was it's really like 40 years in 1 minute. So it's also, and that's really, to a certain extent, I think everything that Rabbi Rosenberg said is really true and powerful. And I had mentioned in my remarks earlier that I really grapple with being in a position that I know people somehow find threatening. And somehow within that narrative has come about this idea of this like feminist agenda. I'm not even really sure what the feminist agenda is. I'm apparently not on the mailing list, but maybe you are. I don't know. But in this idea that somehow, and it's fascinating to me because I'm in a community where people aren't really opposed to the idea of women's learning. They're not necessarily opposed to the idea of women taking on leadership roles. We're very comfortable with women being the heads of departments in universities or arguing before a Supreme Court or whatever it might be. And yet somehow I'm part of this feminist agenda because within Judaism I'm corrupting things. So I'm a feminist also to the extent that I think women should have equal rights, equal access within Judaism. We should be paid the same amount that men do. We should be able to do all of the same things, and I don't see it as different because I'm a woman, as other people have mentioned. My job is different because I'm different than everybody else, not inherently because I'm female. And yet, somehow if I answer this question, I set back women's rights 40 years, so I'll leave it at that.
I will say yes, absolutely. And maybe to the extent that I really like Rabbi Rosenberg's equalist. I really like that. But to say that I'm not a feminist would certainly not be true. And I absolutely owe a huge debt of gratitude to all of those generations of angry women who came before me. So a big thank you to them so that I don't actually have to be angry, so that I can be who I am, so I can be as feminine as I want to be and still be out in the world and working, but also have the choice of being home if I want to, but also that my husband should be able to have that choice as well. So yes.
If being a feminist means equal opportunities for both genders, then yes. However, I grew up in a very traditional household. And when I was in high school, I was the first class with 2 other women who refused to take home economics. So I don't know how to cook and I don't know how to sew. We had macaroni and cheese out of a box tonight that my husband made. And I took shop class. I took metal and woodworking. And, did I do that because I was a feminist, or was I just rebelling because I was a 14 or 15-year-old? I'm not really sure. I remember never having problems with language, with gender language, until I was in a senior seminar in philosophy class. And a girl named Caroline, who looked very progressive and very with it, we're reading, and all of a sudden she goes, "Stop. I cannot read another word. It's as a barrier." And she was talking about male language. And at the time, it didn't bother me. Now I don't use gender language. But I think how I define being a feminist is someone who is comfortable in one's own skin. And I think that when we're comfortable with who we are and the choices that we're making, then in fact we're a feminist. There are times when I've worked full time, there's times when I'm not, but I've been comfortable with my choices. And I think that's probably more important than a title.
I'm proud to say I'm a feminist. Whatever it means. I just feel, I grew up listening to Free to Be You and Me on the white portable record player turntable, all by myself in the guest bedroom with the green shag carpet, sort of daydreaming about, why William can have a doll, and and Marlo Thomas was my hero, and all of those things. And that's an important part of who I am. Those songs that I can not sing beautifully for you, but can know every word. I think I think, the comment at the beginning that who would have thought that, all of us would be able to be here today, and so many more female clergy who are in the community and around the world. And it's amazing, and I think sometimes we get confused by how far we come doesn't mean that that's the end. There are still a lot of fights worth fighting, and to me, being a feminist means looking for the humanity, the beauty, the B'Tselem Elohim, the goodness and the respect that each person, regardless of gender, is deserving of, and also being very proud of the contributions that my gender makes. And I think that women, not just in the field of clergy, but I think that women working in all fields that were traditionally only open to men, have broken open lots of not barriers, but I think it, one of the most beautiful things to me is that it allows men to look at themselves differently as well. The rabbis that I grew up, looking up to, who were men, would have never dared to talk about in their contracts what paternity leave means and why it's important, and why it's important for a man to model being at home with his family. Women did that for men, and we should be proud of that, in my opinion.
So I also grew up listening to Free to Be You and Me, and I still have it in the car, in fact, and I listen to it all the time. And I also took a lot of feminist studies classes in college, and definitely would have referred to myself as a feminist. And then when I was 22, a good friend of mine, and a friend of Amy's as well, who I had spent my whole girlhood with, came out as being transgender. And that just completely changed my life, because the first time I realized that being a woman and a man really had nothing to do with it, that there were so many different issues that I was not even aware of. And so, when I talk to my friend Dylan now, we often talk about the fact that really gender does not have so much to do with who we are anymore. Or maybe it has everything to do with who we are, but I can't define who I am because I'm a woman, because I know that even what it means to be a woman or to be a feminist or to be a man, that those things are constantly changing. And so it simply is just not a focus of who I am anymore. And I just think that I'm very lucky to be in this position where I have this wonderful job, and I can be a woman, and my husband can be a man and have the same job. And as my friend Dylan said, when I found out that I was pregnant with a girl, and I said to him, I'm really nervous. I don't know if I'm going to be a good mom for a girl. And he said, well, maybe she'll turn out to be a boy. And I just thought, all right, well, then that's the end of the discussion. So. You were at that wedding, actually.
I was. I know. I'm a proud militant feminist, and I think we have a long way to go, and I think for me what it means to be a feminist is to not forget, our job is to move the margins to the middle, as Dalia Fadila said, Israeli Arab woman who came to this community, because to be a feminist means you don't leave anybody behind. And, we have, trafficking in this community. We have young women who are property still. We have women across the world still being stoned, we have a long way to go. And for me, to be a feminist and is to use my privilege to make sure that I work for the liberation of all women. And my daughters would say that we are post-feminists today, and I wish that was true, but I think we have a long way to go. For a time when we really do see. My first words were, I didn't want to be a token in a patriarchal, tradition. And I still feel like we have a lot of paradigms to shift before we change the world for all people. And I think the liberation of women, and I think the Jewish mystical tradition teaches this in its core. The liberation of women is what's going to take for the liberation of all. And I hope it comes soon.
So I just got the sign that there are 2 minutes remaining. And I'd like to use those 2 minutes to show our appreciation to these women who have been so generous with their time. You see, usually you're the one standing.
Thank you.
This is an amazing evening. And really, the people who put it together, and do me a favor, stop leaving. Because this is important. And it's important to be present, and it's important to say thank you. And the people you should thank are the co-chairs of Women's Philanthropy, Vicki Singer and Sherry Schumann. They're here to make some closing remarks.
First of all, thank you so much to our esteemed rabbis who participated tonight. We learned so much about each one of you. St. Louis is so lucky to have you. Yes. And thank you, Ellen, for being a part of this very special event and for doing such a fantastic job moderating our program this evening. Okay. Thank you, Barbara, for doing a wonderful job as our chair of the event, and also to our committee. Really, thank you, thank you. And also, most of all, thanks to all of you here. Everyone here has made history tonight. And we just also want to thank our wonderful sponsors and everyone who has made a tribute to the Jewish Federation of St. Louis in honor of our St. Louis women's clergy. If you would still like to make a tribute, there are envelopes on the way out. We hope you've had a chance to look at the Midwestern wall, which is right over there on your way in. It's in the back of the room. Everyone who has made a tribute has their name on the wall. We're so proud to be a part of this amazing community. And I'll hand it over to my co-chair, Sherry. Thank you.
The Jewish Federation of St. Louis is proud to be the foundation of the community, bringing community together and preserving and enhancing Jewish life in St. Louis, in Israel, and around the world. We are here to ensure our community's Jewish future through fostering Jewish identity, serving as a safety net for the vulnerable, ensuring a safe Jewish world, and creating a vibrant Jewish community. Through the community's support, we are so thrilled to make these goals a reality. We're so glad you came tonight. We, the organizers, are the women of Women's Philanthropy. Like our clergy, we are all denominations and with a varied background. Our common goal is to enhance our Jewish life. We have many opportunities for involvement, from once-a-year participation in our signature shower to our ongoing community service opportunities and great programs like the one you've experienced tonight. Our credo is connecting community, inspiring social good. Come connect with us and help make a difference in our Jewish community. We want to thank the Jay and Lynn Whittles for sponsoring us, and we hope to see you again in another program soon.